I'm Eliot Higgins. I'm the founder of Bellingcat, but before I founded Bellingcat, I was a blogger. And that work included, basically it came from my need to basically argue with people on the internet and win those arguments. I was someone who spent too much time online. I was getting annoyed about what other people were saying, but I kind of asked the question of myself, well, if I'm going to have an argument with people, can I do it using facts and evidence? I discovered when debating what was happening in the conflict in Libya, that there were these videos being shared from the conflict. And people would often say, well, how do you know where something was filmed? Well, I figured out how to do that. I used satellite imagery and other reference material to compare it to what was in the videos and show exactly where they were filmed. And that was my first taste of what we now call open source investigation. But back then it was just kind of looking at satellite imagery and comparing, and it wasn't really a field of investigation. But over the years, I kind of developed this field, and I started that off with a blog I started called the Brown Moses blog, after a Frank Zappa song that I enjoyed listening to rather. And you can see it here, hopefully. And this is the blog. It doesn't look like much. I didn't really put much effort into it. It was really just a hobby, just a place to put down ideas. And in fact, this is the first post, which is actually about the phone hacking scandal in the UK back in 2012. But I did that for about 2 years. And there was a major case I found in 2013, which really kind of brought me to the attention of a lot of people, where I had been watching videos from Syria that showed all kinds of different weapons and trying to figure out what these weapons were. What weapons did the rebels have? What bombs were being dropped on these people? And I had found things like cluster bombs being used, incendiary munitions, barrel bombs. But what I discovered in early 2013 were videos and photographs shared by rebel groups of new weapons. And I was trying to figure out where these weapons had come from, and I discovered they were from the former Yugoslavia. And in fact, these weapons, we later discovered, working with the New York Times, were being smuggled from Saudi Arabia to the rebel groups in Syria. And it was the first evidence that this was actually happening. And it was all discovered because I had been watching lots of YouTube videos coming from Syria and trying to figure out what everyone had. So that brought me to a greater amount of attention in early 2013. I did a lot more then on chemical weapons attacks and kind of built my reputation on my really terrible looking blog. And then eventually I decided I needed something a bit more professional looking, and I launched Bellingcat. The idea there was we'd not only have articles using open source investigation, but also resources for people to use. And at that point, Bellingcat was basically £60,000 in crowdfunding, me as the kind of only person really running things, and a bunch of volunteers. And the first case we actually ended up investigating was the downing of Malaysian Airlines Flight 17, because Bellingcat was launched on July 14th, 2014. And 3 days later, that's when MH17 was shot down. So one of the first things we did is look at the videos and photographs, which you can see here of the missile launcher, and figured out exactly where these photographs were taken in eastern Ukraine. And then using other details, such as the shadows being cast as a kind of sun timer, is we managed to figure out exactly the time these photographs were taken in many cases. Also, people posting on social media saying, I've just seen a missile launcher drive through my street at the same time that the photographs seem to have been taken. So we could build this timeline and it show where this missile launcher was being transported to. But we also started coming across videos from elsewhere. And when I say we, I mean basically just a bunch of people on the internet having a chat about what was happening and digging through YouTube videos. And we discovered a lot of videos of a Buk missile launcher convoy in Russia, which we also tracked. And we could see it was traveling from the city of Kursk down to the border. And these are various locations where it was sighted, all social media posts made by Russians on a variety of social media platforms that were discovered. And what we discovered is one of these missile launchers had markings on the side of the missile launcher and damage, and this is just a representation of some of it, that was identical to the one that was seen in eastern Ukraine on the day MH17 was shot down. And by carefully examining these details between that Russian missile launcher and the one on July 17th, we realized it was the same missile launcher, that this was the missile launcher from Russia that shot down MH17. So that was one of the first kind of big investigations, and that really made Bellingcat's name, especially in the Netherlands, where there were, of course, a lot of victims. But the story that really made our name in the UK was the Skripal assassination, because these two guys went on to Russia Today and started saying how they were sports nutrition salesmen. But what we discovered is they were not sports nutrition salesmen. They're in fact GRU agents and working for the Foreign Intelligence Services of Russia. And the way we figure that out is basically through a massive amount of information that had been leaking from the Russian system For years, there had been databases being sold in Russian markets from the government of house registrations, car registrations. There's also basically a black market online for information as well that could get you anything, passport details, phone records. And we used that to great extent. We actually discovered these people were serving GRU officers by piecing this information together. But then that opened up a whole new wave of investigation for us, because we discovered that the same unit of GRU officers had been involved with the poisoning of a Bulgarian arms dealer a few years earlier, Milian Gebrev. At the time, the authorities said he was basically having a bad case of food poisoning. But what we discovered is a GRU team working with the same unit had been watching him just before he had been poisoned. And in fact, after that was revealed, CCTV footage, which you can see here from the day of the poisoning, showing a very mysterious figure in a parking garage walking up to a car, which he was then went to the side of, disappeared for a minute or two, and then he came out from the other side and looks back at the car to see what had happened. And we believe this is actually the moment when the car was poisoned by the assassination team. And in fact, it seems extremely likely now, based off our research, that there will be kind of more work done on this when Bulgaria is trying to ignore this entire case. But we discovered, looking at the phone records of these guys, that they've been phoning up people who worked here. And this is a laboratory in Russia. And it, funny enough, makes sports nutrition. And we discovered that the scientists who work there are not sports nutrition specialists, but specialists in Novichok, the poison that was used in the Skripal assassination, and likely the same one that was used in the Gebrev poisoning. And we discovered this by examining phone records very carefully, looking into the individuals. And we discovered that what had actually happened when the Novichok program had been shut down in Russia when they joined the Chemical Weapons Convention is the scientists who worked on that had moved to facilities like this, where they were supposedly working on things like sports nutrition, but they were also talking to assassination squads just before they poisoned people. I don't think that was about sports nutrition. So we discovered this. And of course, then we had the Navalny assassination tape, and we can see him in a coma as he's being transported to Berlin. So in August 2020, the opposition leader Navalny fell extremely ill on a flight, and then eventually fell into a coma, and then he was transported to Berlin. We started looking into this, and the first place we started looking is the phone records of those same scientists. And we discovered they'd actually been phoning up a lot of FSB officers just before the poisoning. And we looked into these FSB officers, which you can see here. And we discovered that, in fact, they had travel records we were able to access, phone records we were able to access, that showed that they had followed Navalny not only on that day, but on 40 other occasions. And we were able to show, just this is a sample of the data, where the white lines are Navalny traveling and the multicolored lines are when people travel to where he is. But on nearly every trip where he stayed overnight, Navalny would actually be followed by members of this team, including this set of trips, which was the time he was poisoned. Not only did we have all this flight data collected, we also had the data of where all the cell phones had been connecting of some of these individuals, which included one person whose cell phone had connected to a cell phone tower just 6 minutes drive away from his hotel on the day he had actually been poisoned. So we had lots of kind of information like this, and we showed that Navalny was poisoned by this team. It helped that when Navalny called up one of the suspects, that the suspect gave a 50-minute confession after being convinced that Navalny was actually one of his boss's assistants, which was a very interesting moment for us as an investigation team. But we kept digging into these FSB team who was responsible for this attempted assassination. And we've discovered 3 more successful assassinations. On the left, we have a Russian opposition figure who is part of the official Russian opposition, and 2 activists in the Caucasus regions who were quite minor individuals, which surprised us. It wasn't just about big figures like Navalny. We've also discovered Vladimir Karamerza, who was a big opposition figure who is friends with Boris Nemtsov and worked in the US in the Magnitsky Act for the US, was actually involved or was actually poisoned twice by the same team who followed him. He then mysteriously fell into a coma and was then flown out to the US for treatment. So what we kind of have actually discovered, starting with that Skripal assassination case, is basically a Russian assassination program at home and abroad using an illegal nerve agent factory. And that's Bellingcat. Thank you.